Okay. So now I'm going to do the second half of practice exam, questions 28 through 47. Here, this is going to be coming from chapter 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is GDP, chapter 11 CPI. All right. So 28. So a worker received a $5 daily wage in 1930, which has the equivalent of $63.24 today. If the CPI was 17 in 1930, what is the value of the CPI today? Round to the nearest whole number. Well, our formula, remember, dollars in today's terms. All right. Well, what is that? Well, that's, the dollar amount in year T times, you got to correct it, the CPI for today divided by the CPI, year T. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, we have the dollars in today's terms, which is 63.24. What else do we have? Well, we have the dollar amount in year T. Year T is 1930, and that was $5. Well, what about the CPI for today? Well, we don't have that. That's what we need to find. That's our one variable here. What about CPI in year T? Well, that's going to be 17. Well, what do you need to do now? You want to get CPI today by itself? And so you need to divide 63.24 by 5. You also need to multiply by 17. And when you do that, what you should get is, approximately 215. Okay. It's approximately 215. So that'll be your CPI for today, and that'll be A. Okay. 29. What is this question asking? The CPI differs from the deflator in that, that's going to be C. Increases in the price of foreign produced goods that are served to the U.S. consumers show up in the CPI, but not in the deflator. All right, the deflator only includes goods produced that year or current period of time, in the country that you're looking at. So for the U.S., the deflator is only going to include goods that are produced by the U.S. within the U.S. Okay, it could be a foreign producer. Some of the, I think, Honda, BMW, they produce cars within the U.S., but anything that's produced within the United States border is part of our GDP deflator. But for the CPI, though, it's going to include everything. They want to get the true cost change, the true cost of living changes for the average household. And so since we buy certain goods that are from, that are foreign produced, well, they got to include that as well. So that's the difference. So that's going to be C, like I said. So let's erase this. All right, 30. At the University of Trinidad and Tobago, tuition in 1972 was $15 per credit hour. In 1999, it was $77 per credit hour. The consumer price index for Trinidad and Tobago was 26.1 in 1972 and 110.9 in 99. So, all right. So what was the 1999 tuition per credit hour in 1972 dollars? So we got what it actually is. 1999, it was 77 per credit hour. We want to put that in terms of 1972's dollars, though. All right. What would that be, according to that time? We want to correct it for inflation is what we're doing. Okay. And then we get to see what kind of change it was. All right. So what we need to do, we want to get the tuition in terms of 1972. Okay. And so we're looking at the 1999 tuition, what it actually cost. And so that was $77 per credit hour. All right. Now, how do we want to correct this? Well, here on top is you want the CPI from the year you want to correct it to. And the CPI in 72 was 26. Right. Well, what about the bottom? Well, you want the CPI from the year you're looking at here. And the $77 was from the CPI in 1999. So that's going to be 110.9. And if you multiply this out, what you should get is $18.12. So the 1999 tuition in terms of 1972 dollars is 18.12. Okay, so you can see it's a little bit, even after you correct for inflation, it's a little bit more expensive than what it actually cost in 1972. So the cost of the university tuition has actually increased at a faster pace than the rest of the economy, which is the same way here too in the US. All right, a lot more drastic than that as well. Okay, and so we said that would be A. 31. All right, so this question wants us to find the inflation rate in 2010, 2011. Well, we need to find the CPI for 2010, 2011. All right, so first let's find the cost of the basket. In 2009, we got to find the cost of the basket for all 3 years. Cost of the basket in 2009. And we said the basket here consists of 4 hamburgers and 8 hot dogs. So you got to use this for all 3 years. All right, that's the basket you got to use. But you use the prices, from that current year. So in 2009, hamburgers were $5 each. And the basket has 4. Right? Well, what about hot dogs? They were $3 each, and the basket for the average consumer is 8. And so if you add that out, what you should get is $44. 20 plus 24. Well, what about the cost of the basket in 2010? Well, there it's $5.50 times 4. Prices went up. Remember, you use the same basket for hot dogs, $3.30. 8 hot dogs, we're going to use the same basket like we said. And so that gives us $48.40. That's the cost of the basket. All right, in 2010. What about the cost of the basket in 2011? Well, the cost of the basket in 2011, we said was, it costs $5.61 for a hamburger. Still use the same basket for what about hot dogs? We said that was $3.63. Use the same basket, 8. And we say that cost was $51.41. That's the cost of the basket in 2011. All right, so now we want to determine the CPI. Well, the base year, we're using 2009. So CPI 2009, we're going to say that is 100. It's always 100 for the base year. What about the CPI for 2010? Well, we use the cost of the basket in 2010. We'll put it on top, $40.08.40. On the bottom is always the base year cost of the basket, and that's 44. And you multiply by 100, and what you'll get there, the CPI is 110. All right. Now, what about the CPI for 2011? Well, the cost of the basket was in that year was $51.48. What about in the denominator? What do you divide it by? Well, the same thing, the cost of the basket in the base year, 44. And you multiply that by 100, and what you'll get is 117. All right, so now let's do what we need to determine. That is the inflation rate. Remember the inflation rate. We'll do it first for 2010. And so that's going to be the CPI in the current year, 2010. And that's 110. Minus the CPI from the previous year, 2009, 100, divided by the CPI in the previous year, times 100. And what you'll get there is 10%. Okay. Once again, inflation, when you're calculating it. You use whatever price index for the current year that you're trying to determine it for, subtract by the previous years, divide it by the previous years, multiply by 100. And that gives you the inflation rate. What about inflation for 2011? Same way. Except now the current year is, we use the CPI from 2011, which is 117. Subtract by the previous year, which is now 110. Divide it by 110, multiply by 100. And what that'll give you is an inflation rate of, where did I get on that? 6.36. Yeah, there it is. 6.36. All right, and that's going to be A. That's the answer to that one. A. All right, let me erase this. Okay, let's see. So now we're on 32. What does 32 want to know? The table below applies to an economy with only two goods. It's all right, it's the same starting off point. It said now the base year is 2010. So we're going to still use the same cost of the baskets. We'll put these up here. For 2009, we said it was $44. For 2010, we said it was $48.40. In 2011, we said it was $51.48. But now the base year is 2010. So the CPI in 2010 is 100. Well, what's the CPI for 2009? Well, that's the cost of the basket, 44, divided by the base year. Now the base year is 48.40. Multiply that by 100. And what do you get? Well, you get 90.9. Okay. So the CPI now from 2009 is 90.9. What about the CPI for 2011? Well, the cost of the basket there is 51.48. And what's the cost of the basket for the base year? Well, that was 48.40. Multiply that by 100, and what do you get? 106.3. And which number is that? Well, that's going to be C. All right. Okay. So we're going for 33. This is connected. The base year is still going to be 2010. The same price index, same basket. But we want to know what the inflation rate in 2010 is. Okay. So let me write all this out. So we want to know the inflation for 2010. So we use the current year, CPI 2010, subtract previous year, 2009, divide it by CPI from the previous year, multiply by 100. So what do we have here? CPI in 2010 was 100. CPI in 2009 was 90.9. Divide it by 90.9, then multiply by 100. And what does this give you? Well, that should give you 10%. And that's going to be B. All right. So now we can erase this. Okay, now 33. I mean, that was 33. Did I get something wrong here? Yeah. Did I say that was C or B? Anyway, 33 is 10% in B. So now I'm on, now I'm on 34. I don't know what I thought I was on 33. All right, so 34. By far the largest category of goods and services representing the CPI basket is housing. That's the majority. I mean, that makes sense too. Most people spend the majority of their earnings on their housing. 35. If the expected inflation rate is 2%, nominal interest rate 7%, and the economy is growing at the rate of 3%, the real interest rate is equal to what? Well, ignore the growth rate. It's irrelevant to the question. The real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. The real interest rate is where you're correcting for inflation. You want to know, okay, what is this amount of dollars? What does it change in by in real terms? If you put money in your bank, the bank's give you 7%. Well, what's my real purchasing power increase? How many more goods and services is it going to allow me? Well, you want to find the real interest rate. That's how much the value of the money is actually changing in terms of real goods and services. And so to get the real interest rate, we take the nominal interest rate, which is 7, subtract by 2, which is expected inflation. And so the real interest rate is 5%, and that is D. 36. All right. If in 1970 Professor Plum earned 12,000, I don't need more room for this one. In 1980, he earned 24,000. In 1990, he earned 36. If the CPI was 40 in 1970, 60 in 1980, and 100 in 1990, then in real terms, all right, based off like what goods cost then, the salary he's getting in each of these different, where can Professor Plum, have, purchase the most goods with his salary, is what it's asking pretty much. So we want to put this in real terms. All right, so what we'll do, we'll say we're, starting off from 1990's dollars. And so we know his salary is worth 36,000 in that terms of $1990. We want to convert the rest of these. We want to put it in the rest of these in 1990's dollars. So in 1980, his salary was 24,000, but we want to correct this. All right? We want to use the CPI from 1990, which was 100, and divide it by the CPI that was from 1980. That's going to be 60. So when we correct this, what we're getting is a salary of 40,000. So in 1980, he was getting paid 24,000, but in $1990, that would be the same as 40,000. But what about 1970? Well, he was getting paid 12,000. We want to correct it in today's dollars. I mean, 1990's dollars. CPI there was 100. Well, what was the CPI where this came from? That's what we're correcting it from. That was 40. And what does this give you? Well, this gives you 30,000. So the highest is in 1980, and the lowest was in 1970. And so that's going to be A. All right. 37. GDP, or gross domestic product, is defined as what? So this is going to be A. It's the value of all final goods and services, not intermediate goods. If goods are going to be used in something else to produce it and sold, well, you don't want to double count it. All right, you only want to count it when it's at its final point itself. Goods and services, tangible goods, intangible services, produced for the marketplace. It needs to be sold within the marketplace. Home production doesn't count. Over a period of time, quarter or yearly is where they keep up with it. Within domestic borders, it has to be produced within the country. Okay, so that's going to be A. 38. The Culver House College of Business at the University of Alabama, a public university, is currently building the new Houston Hall. This will be classified in US GDP as investment. Okay, because it actually increases the capital stock. All right, this is like what would be considered investment from them. The same as when someone buys a house, that's considered residential investment. When a company builds a building or a university builds a hall for like either students to stay at or like for professors to give lectures. This is considered investment. All right, it builds up the capital stock. So 39, which of the following item is counted as part of government purchases? So remember, transfer payments don't count. Those only get counted once the person actually spends it on a goods or service. So A, federal government pays 2,000 Social Security benefits to a retired person. That doesn't count as GDP. Okay, it's not part of government purchases. It'll get counted later on when this person buys something with it. That's when it'll be counted here. But it's not counted because it's just a transfer. Now B, this will be counted. The city of Athens, Ohio pays $10,000 to a tree trimming firm to trim trees along City Boulevard. They're paying for a service here. The government is. They're purchasing this service, and so that will go into that. All right. C, the state of Nebraska pays 1,000 unemployment benefits to help people who are qualified. Well, that's not either. That's a transfer. When these unemployment benefits are actually spent, then it'll go into one of these categories: consumption, investment, or whatever. Okay. So it's only B here. All right. On to 40. In the economy of Martinville in 2010, consumption was 60% of GDP. So let's do this problem here. C was 0.6 of GDP. Government purchases were $212, so G was 212. Imports were 67. Exports are equal to 60. I'm sorry. So the $67 here is equal to 0.67 of exports. So to determine exports, we just take $67 and we'll need to divide it by 0.67. And that should give you $100. So what's net exports? We need net exports. So that's going to be $100 exports minus imports, 67. So that's going to be $33. All right. And lastly, what else do we need? Investment was 1/2 of the value of consumption. So investment is 0.5 times 0.6 GDP. So investment is 0.3 of GDP. That's what percentage it makes up. All right, so let's put this in our formula. GDP is equal to consumption, investment, government purchase, and net exports. So what is that? Well, consumption is 0.6 GDP. Investment is 0.3 GDP. What about government purchases? We said that was 212. And what about net exports? We said that was $33. So what can we do here? Well, we can subtract 0.6 GDP and 0.3 GDP from both sides. So that's 0.9 GDP. You subtract that from GDP, will give you 0.1 GDP. And on the right-hand side, what do we have left? Well, $245. So what can we do here? If we multiply through by 10, we'll get GDP equals $2,450. And so that will be C. All right. $41. GDP does not reflect the value of leisure. No, it doesn't. It can you know, the higher GDP, you know, you can do things in your leisure time that you couldn't otherwise if it was lower. The value of goods and services produced at home has nothing to do with that. It doesn't measure that. The quality of the environment. Even though a higher GDP, you can clean up the environment, right? You know, the more developed countries actually do have a cleaner environment than some of the developing or like the third world countries. You know, having this allows you to do things to clean up everything. So that's actually going to be B. 42. Consider two cars manufactured by Chevrolet in 2009. During 2009, Chevrolet sells one of two cars to Sean for $24,000. Later in the same year, Sean sells a car to Katie for $19,000. The second automobile with a market value of $30,000 is then sold at the end of 2010, and it remains in Chevrolet's inventory. The transactions described contribute how much to GDP? Well, consumption would be $24,000. That's from Sean buying it. When he resells it to Katie, it doesn't count. The resale doesn't count. It's the first time it's sold. That would be double count. You want the GDP, you want to know what you're actually producing that year. All right. And so only one car is produced that it sold for 24,000. What about the other car? Well, it gets counted as 30,000 in inventory. And so the total change in GDP is 54,000. All right, and that is C. 43. In the economy of Rexton, consumption was 4,000. So we have our GDP with consumption plus investment plus government plus net exports. Consumption we said was 4,000. Exports were 800. GDP was 9,500. Imports were 200. Investment was 1,000. What were government purchases? That's the only thing we don't have here. So net exports will be 600. When you subtract 800 from 200. All right, so how can we get government purchases? Well, subtract 5,600 from 9,500. And what that'll give you is 3,900. Okay. We know GDP is 9,500. Well, we got all these other things. Well, we need this to equal to 9,500. So if government purchases is 3,900, if you add all these up, that'll give you $9,500. And that's B. 44, the GDP deflator. Well, that's just nominal GDP divided by real GDP, times 100. Or you can write it in the problem, it just writes it nominal GDP times 100 divided by real GDP. Okay. 45, negative net exports means that, well, you're importing more than you're exporting. So you're buying more goods from other countries than you're selling, exporting to these other countries. So that's going to be B. What's 46? Which of the following is not an example of physical capital? The knowledge of workers, that's human capital. Factory building, delivery van, office chair, those are all physical capital. The knowledge of workers are considered like human capital, right? Anytime you're getting education, knowledge on the job, those are all considered human capital. All right, so last question. This will be doing the deflator. We want to find the deflator and the inflation rate for this problem where there's economy in 2020, 2021, popcorn and soda. Now we're doing deflator now, so you don't use a basket, you're using what's actually being produced each year now. So this will be a little bit different than the deflator. All right, first, let's calculate the nominal GDP for 2020. So we'll use the real price of popcorn, $5, times the quantity produced. This will give us the total value of popcorn produced that year. What about soda? $4 for each soda times 250. This is going to be 1,000 plus 1,000. And we say that's 2,000. So nominal GDP is 2,000 in 2020. What about real GDP? Well, this is our base year. So it's going to be 2,000 as well, because we're using those prices. All right. Now, what about the nominal GDP for 2021? Well, we use the prices from that year times the quantity sold or produced, and the price of soda from that year, $5, times the quantity produced. What is that going to give you? 1,800 plus 2,000 equals 3,800. Real GDP for 2021. Here we want to use the base year prices. All right. Now in 2020, it didn't matter. They're going to be the same when you do this because you're using the same prices for both of them. But now we want to use the prices from 2020. So $5 for the popcorn times the quantity sold that year, 300, plus the price of soda from the base year 2020, which is $4, times the quantity sold that year. So this will be 1,500 plus 1,600. Man. And so that'll give you a total of $3,100 for the real GDP. All right, so now what we need to find. First, the deflator for 2020. That's the base year, so we know it's 100. Nothing to it. What about the deflator for 2021? Here's where you need to use your formula. The NGDP from 2021 and the real GDP from 2021 times 100. So what's this going to be? Well, it's going to be 3,800 divided by 3,100 times 100. And that's going to give us a deflator of 122.58. Okay. All right, so lastly, what we got to find now, we have the deflators for both these years. So this is our price index, and we use that to find the inflation rate for 2021. Let's erase this top part. We'll leave those. We're going to use those numbers. So inflation, we're using a different index now. We're not using CPI, we're using deflator. So it's going to be the deflator from 2021 minus the deflator from 2020 divided by the deflator from 2020 times 100. All right, so what will that be? The inflation for 2021 using deflator will be 122.58 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100, and that'll give us a rate of 22.6 approximately. So that'll be the inflation rate for this economy here. All right, 22.6%. Okay. All right, so that's it for the test. I hope this was helpful.